Thank you guys so much for being here. We're glad you're a part of our church service today. We are continuing in our series called What's Next? Over the course of the last couple of weeks, we've been looking up a few different ideas. We've been trying to understand first what was next as we were trying to plan ahead in our own individual lives. Then we looked at what's next in the life of the church, how that plays out, what that looks like, and how we can learn from the past and prepare for the future. That was last week. And then this week, we're going to be looking at a completely different idea of how we try to have a grasp on what comes next. And maybe if we're holding on to things a little too tightly than what we should be. So I want to ask you guys a question here this morning. What is the thing that you want more than anything else in the world? Actually think about that for a minute. What do you want more than anything else? Go ahead and give me some answers. What do you think? What do you want more than anything else? Go ahead and shout them out. Go ahead. World peace. Okay, what else do we have? Anybody else? This is interactive. It's totally okay. You're allowed to talk in church. I promise. Go for it. Jesus. Okay. What else? Nobody? Security. All right. Now, I want to show you a couple of things that I kind of came up with for what each of us wants. We want health. Who here doesn't want to say, you know what, I'm healthy. This year was good. I hope the next year is good. I want my health. I want wealth. I want to not have to be constantly struggling or worrying about how things are going to happen. I want my car to start when I turn it on in the morning. These are some things that are wants that we have. Some of us want peace. We're tired of looking at the news and hearing all of the horrible things that are happening in the world. Some of you say, my kids' behavior, it's terrible, and I would really like it if my kids were better. For some of you, it's safety. You might be in a situation where you're looking at it and saying, I don't feel safe with the things that are going on around me. Others of you might say, security. That might be financial security. That might be, I had a break-in in my car. I had a break-in in my house. We want security. Some of you might say, my house is falling down around my ears. I really want to have a good house. And for others of you, maybe it's patience. Maybe I want all of these things and I don't want to wait for them. Maybe that's kind of where you land with this. But even with all of these, even with every single one of these, this is still not what you want most. And I'm going to give you guys the truth. This is true whether you are a person that says, I've been following Jesus since I was this big, or you're a person who says, you know what, I still have not agreed to sign on that dotted line yet. The thing that each of you wants more than anything else is control. Now, I know some of you are hearing that saying, well, I'm not a control freak. That's not me. That's not who I am. I don't want control. Really? Do you ever have an instance where you've had kids that didn't listen to you? Did you just want to look at them and say, why aren't you listening to me? You want control over the bad behaviors that they're taking part in. For some of you, you might look at that and say, control. What would that really look like? You want control over what happens at your job. You want to know that whenever you go and you apply for this job and you start working there, that you have control over your future, that you can advance in your career. Some of you would say, I would like to have more control over my finances. Some of you would say, I'd like to have more control over my health. All of the things that we listed before have the root desire of having control. But the problem is this. We understand maybe that we want control, but we don't always look at and understand why. And more importantly, we don't understand why is it such a challenge to give up control of what's next. And that's a huge question that we're going to be kind of tackling a little bit this morning. Because at the end of the day, we can all agree with this. We want what we want when we want it, and we don't want to wait. Not ever, not for anything. You don't want to wait for that promotion. You don't want to wait for that pay raise. You don't want to wait for your kids to grow up and get to the point where you can actually have a conversation about their behavior rather than just having to scold them and send them away. You want what you want, and you want it right now. And the reason that we have that innate desire is because we were born with it. From day one, when you were first born, you learned that if you wanted that wet diaper changed, if you cried, someone would come to you and take care of that problem. If you wanted to be moved or held and you would fuss enough, somebody would come and pick you up. You learned this from a very early age. And because we learned that from birth, we've never really wanted to let go of that level of control. We've never been able to get it back either, but we've never wanted to let go of having that kind of control over the things that happen in our lives. But I want to share something with you from a great philosopher. This was years ago, and he gave us a nugget of wisdom that still stands true today. The philosopher Mick Jagger told us, you can't always get what you want. You can't. It's true. There's a lot of truth behind that statement. You can't always get what you want. But because we look at our lives and we say, I don't care. I want it anyway. I will demand it. I will force it. I will create it and make it happen with whatever means I have to. We end up holding on tighter and tighter and tighter to the things that we think we can control. That's our goal with some of the things that we're doing. But Jesus speaks directly into this. He gives us a point-blank explanation for us to understand what he's talking about with this. Now, let me go ahead and actually clear that off of there for a second. What you're going to find out from this is whenever you look through the Bible, whenever you're reading different accounts of Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, when you're seeing what each one of them tells you, there are times that Matthew will hear what Jesus is speaking about and he'll write down one thing because that's what he determined to be the most important. And there are other times where you'll read Mark and they're going to be giving a similar account, but it doesn't quite match up. It'd be like if you and I both went to the same session or same seminar and we heard what was being said, you would take away something different from it than what I would. And that's one of the things we're going to be looking at with one of the things that Jesus taught today. So if you want to go ahead and open up your Bibles, we're going to start in the book of Matthew. That's in the second half of the Bible. It's the part that we call the New Testament. And it's the very first book once you get there. So flip about half to 3/4 of the way through the Bible and look for the book of Matthew. And we're going to be starting in chapter 16. Now, as you guys are turning there, let me give you a little bit of background on what I'm about to put up on the screen. There are different translations that help us understand what the original text was trying to teach us, what it was trying to explain, and what it was trying to say. I'm going to be using one that you don't often see me use up here, but I'm going to be doing it for a very good reason. You'll see that in just a second. So let's start with the base verse. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven, and whatever you release on earth will have been released in heaven. Now, whenever I look at something like that, there are times that I'm not necessarily sure what exactly it's talking about, because for us, we're like, it doesn't really add up for us. We don't talk about binding and releasing, or if you want to go King James, binding and loosing. We don't often talk about things like that. So we're going to go with the Amplified version to have it explain it a little bit more in depth for us. I will give you the keys of authority of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind or forbid or declare to be improper or unlawful on earth will have already been bound or declared unlawful or forbidden in heaven. And whatever you loose or permit or declare lawful on earth will have already been loosed or declared or permitted lawful in heaven. I know that it's a mouthful, but I'm going to explain why it's important. If you are a follower of Jesus and want to start with that crowd, whether you're here today in person or if you're watching online, you're hearing this, and I want you to understand that that means there are things in your life right now, even here today, that are going through your mind, or things that you've done this past week. It might be something you've said, it might be something you've done, it might be something you've posted on Facebook. There are things that have happened even this week that you know was not something that God would have given the green light to. God would have said, no, that's not for you, that's not designed for you, that's not permitted for you, you shouldn't be anywhere near that. And you messed with it anyway. We all fall into that category. That category is called sin. We know that that is there. We know that there are things that we've done that were inappropriate. Now, what this is saying is that whatever you did here that was inappropriate is also going to be inappropriate in heaven. And that's what it's talking about. But the things that you do here that are pleasing to God, things that are good, things that are kind, things that are peaceful, demonstrating self-control, going through and following what we call the fruits of the Spirit, are all things that are permitted here and are permitted in heaven. Now, why do I share this with the Jesus followers? I share this for one very important reason. If you are planning on one day going to heaven, whether you're planning on it being 50 years from now, or you're planning on it being 20 years from now, or you're planning on it being tomorrow, if you're planning on making that trip to heaven, and you're looking at the things that you're doing in your life, and you know it's not going to be permitted in heaven, why not give it up now? Why not stop now? Why not look at it and say, you know what? I know that I have a future in heaven with God, and I know that this is coming one day, and I know that there are things that I'm getting involved with and I'm messing around with, and that God doesn't want me to have any part of any of it. Why not stop now? Pick one thing. Pick one thing that you know is that one area that you just can't quite seem to let go of, and make this the day that you say, I'm going to stop this one now. I'm going to leave this one alone now. I'm going to delete that app off of my phone now. I'm going to have this be the moment where I leave that one individual thing behind. It's a starting point. It's a beginning. It's an area where you can look at it and say, I know it's not going to be allowed in heaven. I might as well stop now. Now, let's go to the other side of the room for a minute. Let's go to the people who are here that are saying, you know what? I'm not even sure whenever you talk about the Bible, I'm not even sure that I believe that anything in there is real. I'm not sure that I believe that any of the stuff that was written, any of the words that are said, I don't know that I believe that it's true. So we'll shelve that for a minute, because we're not asking you to necessarily say yes to this. But what you can say yes to is the universal truth that you know that there are things that are happening in your life right now that are not beneficial, that are not things that you should be doing, that there are conversations that you're having, that there are things that you're looking at online, that there are people that you're talking to, there are friends you're hanging out with, there are people that you are getting connected with that you have no business doing that with. And because you know that, you can also say, why not give it up now? Why not drop it? I know that it's not good for me. I know that it's not something I should be doing. I know that I'm not getting any true, real value out of what I'm dealing with. The reason that it is so hard to stop is because that is an area where you have control. You can choose what you're doing in certain areas of your life. But because you can control what's happening over here, you can choose how that relationship is playing out. You can choose what that feels like. You can choose the things that are bringing you pleasure, and you can choose to continue to be a part of them. You would rather hold on to that as tightly as you can because you know you can control that. And letting it go is going to hurt. It's going to cause you pain. And you don't want to deal with the pain. You'd rather continue to hold on to the thing you have control over rather than look at the other areas of your life where you don't and admit, I've got an issue with letting some of these things go. Is everyone kind of following along with that? Are you getting where that's landing? It's basically Jesus telling you that there are things that one day, if you choose to follow him, that you're going to look at and say, I know that I can't have any part of this. And I know that I need to let this go. And I know that this is what God is telling me. And I know that this is what He is commanding me to walk away from. And I know that this is how these things are playing out, but I don't want to give it up yet. Because giving that up means pain. Giving that up means I'm going to have to lose some friends. Giving that up means I'm going to have to stop going to certain places that I enjoy. Giving that up means I'm going to have to endure something that I won't have any control over how long it lasts. I won't have any control over when it stops. And I don't want to deal with that misery. Because again, each one of us wants to have control. Now, the reason that I explained that we're going to be looking at this through a couple of different lenses is because we're going to flip to the book of Mark now, which is the very next, or Matthew, Mark is the next book right there. So you're going to go to Mark. We're going to be in Mark chapter 9. And Mark is going to be giving us his understanding of this same teaching. He was there for the same time. He's going to give us a different understanding of what Jesus was saying. So Mark chapter 9, starting in verse 34. Now I'm going to go ahead and put that up on the screen, but I want to give you again a little bit of background. If you've been in church for any great length of time, you've probably heard that Jesus had 12 disciples, 12 followers, 12 apostles. He had 12 people that were regularly following him. That is not necessarily accurate. He had an inner circle of 12 people, but at times there could have been hundreds of people following him. And there were things that he did and things that he said throughout that time that drove some of those people away. There were things that he would have people following him, and realistically, we know and we can understand why. Because if you've got a son or a daughter that's been healed from some illness, and this man did it for your child, you're going to want to learn more. So the families would be interested in finding out who this guy is. They would follow him and talk to him and learn from him and study from him until the rubber met the road and they kind of stepped away. And they're like, no, this is getting too real now. I'm going to step away from this. So Jesus started kind of giving each of the people that were hearing what he was teaching, hearing what he was preaching, he started giving them warnings of what it meant to actually follow him. And this is one of them. He said, then, calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross and follow me. Now, obviously, Jesus has not yet taken up his cross because he's there right now. He's saying this. This is prior to him actually being crucified. So he's telling them something that they're going to understand. He's telling them that your life is not going to be easy. Your life in being my follower is going to be hard. He explains it in another way, in a different chapter, where he says, you have to understand, does a person not stop and count the cost of building a house before they begin building? Do they not want to know what it will cost from the very beginning? He's saying, if you're going to follow me, you have to understand what that looks like. He continues on to say this, if you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? So again, Jesus is laying it on the line. He said, there are things that you guys say, you hear me teaching, you hear me preaching, you understand what I'm talking about, you say you want to be my follower, you say you want to be connected with the things that I'm doing, you say you want to follow me. Are you sure? Are you really sure that's what you want? Because if it is what you want, that grip, that control that you try to hang on to in your life, you're going to have to let it go. When you're my follower, that's what's next, is you saying, I know that God doesn't want me to do these things, and dropping them and walking away. That is hard for us today as modern Jesus followers. Imagine what it would have been like back then when we don't have the concern of being killed for our faith. Imagine what it would have been like for them. That would have been a tremendous ask for what they were doing. It would have been super hard for them to say, yeah, I'm willing to give up my life, not just the things that I like doing and the things that I want to do, but I'm willing to legitimately give up everything that I believe in order to follow you. It's a tremendous responsibility. And it's one that too often we end up taking lightly. We end up looking at it and saying, I don't know that I'm ready to let go of these things over here. I don't know that I'm willing to let go of these things over there. I've got too much stuff that I like hanging on to. Maybe for some of you, it's an addiction. It could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be pornography, it could be any kind of an addiction where you look at it over here and you're like, these things have too much control over me. I can't quit doing them. I can't just leave them there and walk away. For others of you, maybe it's a conversation with a coworker that you're having, someplace where your spouse can't see. Perhaps it's on Snapchat, perhaps it's just somewhere in general where your spouse can't see the things that are happening and you're not being fully honest with what's going on. There are things in each of our lives where we start making these decisions where we're not willing to give up that portion of our life. And Jesus doesn't say, if you give up part of your life for my sake, if you give up this corner of your life for my sake. He says, if you give up your life for my sake and the sake of the good news, you will save it. You will save the things that are happening in your life in the future, not in the present, not in the right now. So I want to take a deeper look at this. What do you benefit if you maintain control over these things for this limited time, but it costs you eternity? That's another way of looking at what Jesus is saying. It's another way of understanding what he's talking about. He's saying, you want control. I understand that. I give you control. I give you the control to follow my will, to follow my Father's will in all of these areas. I'm giving you the authority of the kingdom. If you end up saying, I want control over how much wisdom I have, pray for it and God will grant it to you. If you want control over your ability to demonstrate patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness to other people, pray for it and you will be given it. Because if you want to hold on to those are things that you will also hold on to in heaven. Those are things that will also be yours in heaven. If you're asking to find ways to demonstrate them now, I will grant that to you. But if there are things that you're asking for and things that you're doing that are not part of the kingdom you're trying to be a part of, it's going to cost you everything. And it's critical that we understand that. He closes with this. Is anything worth more than your soul? It's a loaded question, isn't it? Think about how often we look at our lives and we say, well, this brings me happiness. This brings me joy. This brings me pleasure. I enjoy doing these things. I know that God doesn't necessarily agree with the fact that I'm doing it, but it makes me feel good. So I think I'm going to go ahead and keep doing so. It's not okay because it's going to cost you everything in the future. And that's a problem for every single one of us. Now, I know that whenever we start talking eternity and we start talking future and you start talking heaven and hell, that there are people that hear that and they kind of check out because they're like, I'm not sure what I believe yet. I'm not sure how that lands. I'm not sure how that makes sense. If you're telling me that I need to follow God's rules and you're telling me that I need to follow his plan and that he's got a design for my life and he's got a plan for what comes next for me, but you're also telling me that it's going to be hard? Why do I do this? I mean, the big question in my mind at that point is why bother? Why bother seeking out God, seeking out His will, if He's not making my life easier? Why would I want to do that? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you're going to be going through the hard things anyway. The difference between a Jesus follower and someone who hasn't yet made that choice is you don't have to go through it alone. Not ever. That works out two different ways. If you're a person that says, well, I'd have to give up my family, I'd have to give up my friends, they won't support this relationship with God. Okay, so they don't support your relationship with God. That means they may cast you aside. That will cause pain, but that's not the end of the world. Because if you give up this life and the things of this life for Jesus Christ, you will gain so much more. You might have to give up that friend group. They might cast you aside. They might make fun of you. They might ridicule you and mock you and cut you off from being a part of that friend group. Again, if you give up that portion of your life and you let it fall by the wayside and you're doing it for Jesus and you're doing it for that purpose, you will be blessed for having made that decision to relinquish your control. So you look at it and you're like, okay, so you're telling me I'm going to lose my family possibly if they're not believers, and you're telling me I'm going to lose my friends, and you're telling me I'm going to gain God, but I can't see God, I can't touch God, God can't give me a couch to sleep on tonight if I need a place to stay. How am I supposed to look at this and say that this is beneficial? How am I supposed to look at this and say this is something that will help me in any way at all? Because at the end of the day, the love of God will make each struggle you endure a little bit easier. Some of them He'll make a lot easier. There are times that God will put people in your life that become family when family isn't there. There are people in this room that would look at someone else who's here and say, you know what? I don't really have a tight relationship with my family anymore. Because I don't have that tight relationship with my family, I rely and lean on the people that are in this room, or people that are also other believers, or people that are also a part of that family of God, where we can get through things together, where I can lean on them and depend on them and count on them for all of the things that my family should be doing in my life, but aren't. It's a tough, tough road to walk. It's not easy to say, yeah, God, I'm going to take what you said to heart. I'm going to pick up my cross and I'm going to follow you. And I know that you're walking up that hill and you're going to be going up there and you're going to be suffering and you're going to be bleeding and you're going to be dying. And I've got my cross and I'm right here and I'm walking right behind you. That road has millions of distractions for us on either side of it. It's got millions of areas that look easier. It's got millions of areas where we could step off to this edge and find relief and find comfort and find pleasure. But if you're a follower of Jesus, there are things on those sides of the road that aren't for you. They just aren't. That's not what you're meant to have in your life. I want to close with this morning. These are things that I've learned not just from the Bible, not just from reading, not just from hearing other great pastors stand up and preach. These are things that I've learned throughout my life and my own personal experiences. God has a plan for your life. God wants to use you in ways that maybe right now you can't even imagine. There are things that He wants for your life that are so much better than what you could picture right now. All you would have to do is say, God, yes, I'm willing. I'll say yes right here and now. For some of you, you need to know that God knows who you are. You're not just a nameless, faceless, person number 3,447,571. That's not you. You are a person that is created in the image of God. He loves you, He cares about you, and He wants to have a relationship with you. But it's important to remember, God isn't going to promise to make the road easier. It's not going to be. There will always be distractions. There will always be choices. There will always be things that come up where you have to make a decision. Do I choose to follow God or do I choose to walk away? Those decisions are going to be a part of your everyday life because there's always an opportunity to sin. He's not going to make the road any easier, but He won't ever leave you there alone. And that counts for everything. Imagine if in a tough, horrible, terrible situation, instead of complaining and arguing and debating and cursing and swearing off everything that's happening around you because you're not getting what you feel you need, or you're not getting what you feel you deserve, or you're not getting what you feel you want, you are able to look at God and say, God, I don't know. Help. Maybe you just look toward God and you cry. You look toward God and you say, I'm broken. I know that I'm to be following you, and I know that you said this road is going to be hard, and I know that you said it's going to cost me things, and I know that you said that we're going to be hated because Jesus was hated first, but God, I just can't take any more hate today. Give me something. What God can give you is comfort. What God can give you is joy. What God can give you is peace. Have you ever seen a person who is a follower of Jesus ending up going through a horrible battle with a terrible illness? Or we'll call it cancer. We'll use that as the example because that's one that is universally true. Almost everybody here has probably known somebody who's gone through cancer. In the midst of that battle, did you see that Jesus follower end up saying, you know what? This is terrible, but I trust God. I'm going to be okay. Whether the chemo works, whether the radiation works, whether any of the things that I'm going through, the nausea, the leg pain, the cramping, all of the things that come as trying to get healed from this, no matter how hard that road is, I'm going to be okay because one way or another, God's going to take care of me. Have you ever wondered where that level of faith and trust comes from? That's what we're talking about. Now, I'm not going to ask anyone to raise a hand or come up front or step out into the aisle. I'm not going to ask you guys to do anything like that. But I am going to ask you, as we're singing our closing song today, where it talks about God saying who we are, God telling us, this is who you are as my child, that you listen to it, listen to the words, sing along and understand the truth of what that means for you. Yeah, your road isn't necessarily going to be made easier because you have a relationship with God. If anything else, it's more than likely going to be made harder. But you will never have to face it alone. And that counts for everything. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. God, as we're thinking through what this looks like and what this means in each of our lives today, Lord, it's not an easy choice to make. We ask that as we're looking through how we say yes in all of the areas where we say yes to you, we're able to do so not just because of the eternal life, the salvation, not just because of the sacrifice, but because we want to obey. God, whenever we're looking forward to what comes next, whenever we're trying to understand how to let go of some of those things that are tough, when we're trying to relinquish our control and give more things over to you, God, more than anything else, we need your strength in that moment. We need your help in that time. And God, we seek it out right here and right now today. God, if there's anyone here that's thinking about what that would look like or how much they'd rather not have to walk the road they're on alone right now, God, I pray that you put that on their heart. Let them make that choice for you now. Because God, walking these paths alone is horribly, horribly painful. But when we know that you're right there to give us the things that we need, it can bring us peace and comfort. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.